Every human myth ends the same way. The galaxy finally understood why. The hull shook again, and a section of the ceiling came down 3 feet to my left. I did not move. I pressed record on the black box unit bolted to the wall, and I started talking. Because if someone was going to find this thing in the wreckage of Conclave Station Orin, they deserved to know what actually happened here. Not the Tessarine version, not the version that gets cleaned up and filed under diplomatic incident, the real one. My name is Callum Marsh. I was Earth's diplomatic observer aboard Orin for 6 years. I say was because as of about 4 hours ago, I stopped being a diplomat. I will explain why. 6 years ago, when I arrived on this station for the first time, a Velthara archivist named Vicaris, a tall, crystalline being whose body chimed faintly when she moved, met me at the docking port with what I can only describe as academic fascination. She watched me walk down the ramp the way a scientist watches a specimen enter a new habitat. Then she said, very gently, that her people had 4,000 years of collected mythology about humans from civilizations that had never made direct contact with us. I laughed. She did not. She showed me some of it, later, in her archive. 200 species, some gone now, some still voting in the conclave chamber down the hall, each of them entirely independently, across centuries and galaxies, had developed folklore, prophecy, or formal academic warning about what humans become when you take everything from them. None of the accounts agreed on details. They argued about physiology, culture, biology. But they all ended the same way, the same image, described in 200 different languages. One human, alone, with nothing left, sitting very still, and then making a list. And then the list becoming something that changed the shape of things. I told Vicaris that was flattering but probably coincidence. She said, Callum, we do not believe in coincidence at this scale. We believe in patterns. Then she poured me something warm and amber-colored that smelled like a library, and we talked for 3 hours about Earth poetry, which she had memorized far more of than I had. That was year 1. Year 3 is when the Tessarine started their work. The Tessarine Ascendancy were the oldest and most powerful wing of the Seraph kin. Tall, feathered, beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when they know it and have stopped being kind because of it. They had built the original framework that became the conclave. They sat at the head of every important committee. They were accustomed to things going the way they pointed. Humanity joining the conclave had annoyed them quietly for 11 years. We were small, new, industrious in ways they found undignified, and, most inconveniently, we were growing fast. Not militarily, economically, diplomatically. Earth had signed more bilateral agreements in 11 years than most species managed in a century, largely because humans had a talent for remembering that the small, unglamorous favor done now becomes the enormous life-saving favor owed later. I had built most of those relationships personally. I knew the junior Dross collective members by the specific rhythm of their spore pulses. I had attended the hatching of a Velthara secondary crystal, and brought a gift that Vicaris later told me was so specifically correct it was almost alarming. I had once, on a 3-hour shuttle detour, transported a Dross peripheral cluster to a medical bay when its carbon filter membrane was failing, because it was dying and I was the only one nearby with a compatible atmospheric unit. Nobody asked me to. I just did it. The Tessarine did not do things like that. They gave orders. They received tribute. They did not understand why anyone would spend political capital on a fungal organism that could barely vote. In year 4, they began buying votes. Quietly. Small species with big debts received offers. Trade routes were adjusted. Resource licenses appeared. The kind of arrangement that is technically legal under conclave charter and morally the rotting core of every empire that has ever fallen. I found out because the Dross intern, and I use that word loosely for an entity that communicates by releasing specific spore clusters into the air, became agitated near me in a session hallway. Agitated for Dross means a very specific biochemical distress signal that smells faintly of copper and wet stone. I had been around them long enough to know what it meant. I pulled it aside and sat with it for an hour in a quiet access corridor, and let it express what it needed to express, and by the end of it I understood the shape of what was coming. I spent 2 weeks building a counter-coalition. I was good at this. I had spent 6 years learning what every species on this station needed and feared and honored and resented. I called in favors carefully, like a surgeon. I wrote proposals in 4 alien scripts. I stayed up until what passed for night on the station's cycle and drafted arguments in frameworks that each culture would find persuasive on its own terms. It was not enough. The vote passed on a Tuesday, 41-12. Earth expelled from the conclave with 90 days to withdraw. Trade sanctions effective immediately. I was permitted to stay as a transition observer, which is a polite phrase that means, We have decided you no longer matter, but we will let you watch your own erasure. I sent a full report to Earth. I waited for a response. 3 days passed. Then 4. The relay had been silent since the vote, and I had assumed it was system load, political awkwardness, the ordinary friction of bad news traveling across space. I wrote careful memos into the silence. I documented everything. I kept working, because working was the only thing I knew to do when I did not know what else to do. On day 5, Vicaris came to my quarters. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke. I had never seen a Velthara look uncertain before. Their crystalline bodies are designed by evolution for stillness and calm. She looked like a building in an earthquake. She told me that 11 of Earth's relay stations had been struck. In 11 seconds. It was being reported in Tessarine dispatches as a meteorite cluster event. It was not a meteorite cluster event. I asked her how she knew. She said the Dross network had passed the information through 7 degrees of connection before it reached her. Dross pass information the way fungi pass nutrients, quietly, constantly, in every direction at once. The Tessarine had used a proxy contractor and had paid in a currency trail that was only visible if you were already watching. The Dross had been watching because the Dross watch everything, because information is the only resource they have ever had in surplus. Earth's communications were dark. I was alone on a foreign station with my civilization cut off and possibly at war without knowing it, and no way to warn them, help them, or even tell them I was still here. I sat down on the edge of my bunk and I did not move for 14 hours. I want to be honest about this because I think it matters. I was not calm. I was not strategic. I was not already planning 3 steps ahead. I was a man, sitting alone in a room in the dark, very far from home, and I was afraid, in the specific terrible way you are afraid, when the people you love are in danger and you cannot reach them. I thought about my mother who had cried at the spaceport in a way she thought I had not noticed. I thought about the colleagues on those 11 relay stations. I thought about what 11 seconds means at that scale. I sat with all of it because there was nothing else to do. Then, at some point in the 14th hour, I got up. I washed my face. I found something edible in the nutrient dispenser. It tasted like cardboard with aspirations, and I ate it standing at the counter. Then I sat at the small desk in the corner of my quarters and I opened a document and I started writing. Not a plan, not yet, a list. Every species on this station, what they needed, what they feared, what I had done for them, in order, over 6 years. What they owed me, not in the transactional sense but in the older sense. The sense of honor that exists in every culture in every galaxy. The sense that says, someone was decent to you when they did not have to be. And that means something. The Dross cluster I had transported in year 2. The Velthara secondary crystal I had attended. The 17 times I had voted in procedural committees in ways that cost me nothing but benefited smaller species enormously. The time I had given 3 months of my diplomatic budget to fund translation of a dying language for a species with no political power, just because they asked, and because their language was beautiful. The time I stayed 3 extra hours in a negotiation so a Korasi delegate, a small arthropod species with rigid social rules around abandonment, would not have to navigate the station alone after a session that had gone badly for them. I filled 11 pages. I had not known there were 11 pages of it until I wrote it down. At the bottom of the list, I wrote 2 words. Now what? I looked at them for a long time. Then I wrote the answer. Everything. I had been expelled from the conclave, but I had not been removed from the station yet. I had been stripped of diplomatic authority, but I had not been stripped of my relationships. The Tessarine had calculated that without institutional power, I was inert. They had forgotten something that every culture in the galaxy apparently knew, except the ones currently in power. Humans do not calculate their options from the top down. We calculate from the bottom up. We count what we have left, however small, and we build from there. I began making contact. Not loud contact. Nothing that would trigger the conclave communication monitoring that now technically applied to me. I visited people. I walked the corridors of Orin, which I knew better than any other human alive, and I knocked on doors. I sat with the Dross cluster and let it express things into the air of a sealed room for 2 hours. I found the Velthara secondary crystal, now full-grown and brilliant, and I asked for a meeting with Vicaris that was logged as a farewell courtesy call. What happened in those rooms I will not detail entirely, because some of it belongs to the people who gave it to me. What I will say is that 6 years of small, unwitnessed kindness turned out to be a form of infrastructure. I had built something without knowing I was building it. The Dross network, which connects every fungal entity on this station through biochemical channels that exist entirely outside conclave regulation, because they predate conclave regulation by about 800 years, had, it turned out, been quietly archiving the Tessarine's internal communications for 3 years. Not out of espionage, out of habit. Information is what dross do. They had not known the information would be useful. They gave it to me anyway, the way they give everything, freely, completely, without keeping score, because they fundamentally do not understand why you would do otherwise. I read 17 hours of Tessarine internal communications in a single sitting. Then I read them again. Then I organized them into a document that was clear, chronological, and devastatingly precise. On the morning of what the Tessarine had designated as my final day on the station, a minor seraph kin lord named Petir, young, sharp-faced, carrying the particular confidence of someone who has never had a plan fail, came to my quarters to escort me to departure processing. He found me dressed and sitting at my desk with my hands folded, which was apparently not what he expected. He asked why I was not distressed. I told him I had a word I wanted to share with him. I said, "In English, when an animal is driven into a corner with no way out, we call it cornered." I said that in most of the galaxy's mythologies, that state ends with the creature surrendering. I said that in ours, it tends to end differently. He told me that was interesting, and that we should get moving. I followed him out of my quarters, and instead of turning left toward departure processing, I turned right. He called after me. I kept walking. I knew every corridor on Orin. I had walked them for 6 years, at all hours, because I am a bad sleeper and because knowing your environment is the oldest survival strategy there is. I knew that in the station's original construction layer, Section 7, Subdeck 4, there was a communications hub built before conclave standardization. It ran on a frequency architecture that was 60 years older than the override systems currently trying to lock down my access. It was used, before it was decommissioned, by pre-conclave species to broadcast on the old frequencies, the archaeological channels, the ones that every elder race still monitored out of sentiment, the way you keep a lamp on for someone who left a long time ago. Vicaris had told me about it in year 1, in passing, the way you mention something you think is merely interesting. I had remembered it the way I remember everything that might one day be useful. I reached Section 7 before Petir could get security coordinated, because security on Orin runs through conclave communication channels, and the Dross had, with enormous goodwill and absolutely no malice, introduced a minor routing error into those channels approximately 40 minutes earlier. The hub smelled like old metal and time. I set up in 4 minutes using equipment I had requisitioned, legitimately, through standard maintenance channels, over the previous 3 days, because I had been planning this since hour 15 after the relay went dark, when I finished my list and wrote the word, everything, at the bottom of it. I broadcast on every pre-conclave frequency simultaneously. I did not editorize. I did not make speeches. I transmitted Earth's full 11-year record in the conclave, every treaty signed and honored, every debt repaid, every compromise made in good faith, every procedural vote, every bilateral agreement, every small kindness done in official capacity and otherwise. 640 pages of documented conduct, unedited, with full timestamps and verification signatures. Then I transmitted the Tessarine's internal communications, the orders for the relay strike, the payment trail, the vote-buying records, the names. The old frequencies carried it in every direction. By the time Petir's security team reached me, the broadcast had been running for 11 minutes. The elder races who still monitor the archaeological channels include species that have been in the galaxy longer than the Tessarine have had writing. They do not forget things, they do not move fast, but they move with the full weight of what they are, and when they move, it tends to be conclusive. The hull is shaking because the Tessarine are attempting to purge the transmitter hardware. They are too late. The transmission was complete in 14 minutes. What exists now cannot be unbroadcast. It is already moving at the speed of light in every direction, which is, I have always felt, a deeply satisfying property of physics. Vicaris found me in the smoke about 20 minutes later. She looked at the transmitter, and then at me, and then at the transmitter again. She asked if I had known it would work. I told her honestly that I had not. I had known what I had, and I had used all of it, and I had not spent any of the time between deciding and doing, wondering whether it would be enough, because that kind of wondering does not help you move faster, and you are moving as fast as you can anyway, so it is simply not a useful activity. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she had read the myths again that morning. All 200 of them. She said she had always read them as warnings. She said she thought now she had been reading them wrong. I asked her what she thought they were. She said, instructions, left by people who watched humans very carefully, for the benefit of anyone who ever had to face one. Within 6 hours of the broadcast, the Tessarine ascendancy had fractured. 3 junior fleets refused orders. The conclave vote was invalidated pending investigation. The relay strike was referred to a war crimes proceeding under the old pre-conclave statutes, which, unlike conclave law, the elder races enforce with a directness that does not involve committee votes. I heard all of this through Vicaris, who was relaying it through the Dross network, which was still routing information around the security channels with cheerful biochemical efficiency. And then, through a partially restored relay, because someone on Earth had been working on that too, from the other side, without knowing what I was doing. Because that is the thing about humans. We tend to work on problems from every angle simultaneously without coordinating. I got a message from Earth. It was formal, official, appropriate for the gravity of the situation. I read every word of it. And then I found the voice message buried in the transmission metadata. 32 seconds. My mother's voice, mostly static, 3 words clear. We're still here. I sat in the smoke of Section 7 for a while after that. The transmitter ticked and cooled around me. Through the wall I could hear the distant sound of Orin's systems slowly restoring themselves, like a body finding its breath after a long time underwater. I pressed record on this unit because I wanted there to be a record that was mine, not institutional, not filed in the Conclave archive under incident. Mine. Vicaris is updating the archive entry on humans. She told me so before she left to give her testimony. She showed me the new notation she is adding to the 4,000-year file, at the end of all 200 independent accounts that each arrived at the same conclusion. For 4,000 years, this material was classified as mythological exaggeration. Reclassification recommended. It is not exaggeration, it is documentation. The shaking has stopped. That is either a good sign or a very bad one, and I will find out which in a moment. Before I go, I want to say one thing for the record. Not for the Conclave, not for Earth's diplomatic files. For whoever finds this unit in the wreckage, in whatever condition, of whatever species, wondering what to do when the situation is impossible, and everything is gone, and there is no way forward that makes sense. We made a word, a long time ago, on a small planet circling an average star. The word is morning. It does not mean the sun is coming. It does not mean things will be better. It means, another hour has passed and you are still here, and so you begin again. We do this every day. We have always done this. We do it whether or not we believe the sun will rise, because the doing of it is not conditional on the outcome. That is what the myths were recording. That is what the galaxy finally understood. My name is Callum Marsh. I was Earth's diplomatic observer. I am signing off now. We're still here.